No one has any doubt that the world we live in is continuously transforming. Changes that are happening are the challenges and the opportunities at the same time. These dynamic changes that are happening in the world right now can also help us to be successful. Today at the DTEK Academy, we will talk with the Ukrainian and international experts about what global changes today can become opportunities for Ukraine. My name is Yulia Melnyk. I'm the Deputy Director of European Business Association for Corporate Development, and I will lead the discussion with our distinguished guests today. Being able to change is one of the key skills that businesses and countries should do nowadays to achieve success. And it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our guest that we are going to talk to about. I will start with Nick Butler, who is the visiting professor and chair of the King's Policy Institute at King's College London, author of the Financial Times weekly blog on energy and power since 2012. He has also served as a senior policy advisor to UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown and chairman of the Centre of European Reform and treasurer of the Fabian Society. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
The next guest is Edward Chow. Edward is a senior associate of the Energy and National Security Program in the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Edward has developed government policies and business strategies while advising governments, international financial institutions, major oil companies, and leading multinational corporations. Welcome. Yulia Bezvershenko. She is a junior researcher at the Bogolyubov Institute for Theoretical Physics and deputy head for Young Scientist Council of National Academy of Science of Ukraine. Welcome, Yulia. And Nataliya Katser-Buchkovska. She is an energy and investments advisor for Ukrainian Institute of Future. Nataliya also served as a member of Ukrainian Parliament and chaired the Sustainable Development Committee of the Energy, Housing and Utilities Services Committees in 2014-2019. And also we have online Mr. Pavlo Sheremeta, who is the advisor to the DTEK Academy and also the Minister of Economic Development and Trade during 2014. Pavlo, you are here, right?
I'm here.
Yes, I guess he is here. So we will start with the first part of our discussion, which is how to change the mindset and use the opportunities that we have. So we often hear the term transformation in our business everyday communication. And by the definition, this term means that we have to have the ability to identify the new opportunities that are there and to use them successfully in our business lives and the lives of our society to make our future better. So, but this transformational thinking and activities, they need this out-of-box thinking, yeah? These new ideas, innovation. And this thinking also need this going out of the stereotypes, which is obviously is not a very easy task to do. So my first question to all of the experts today would be, how do you think, what are the most significant challenges that are happening in the world right now? And what transformations should take place in order to deal with those challenges that we have? Let me start with you, Mr. Butler.
Thank you. I think the biggest challenge is best summed up by a single statistic,
Okay.
which is that within the next hour, the world will have another 10,000 new citizens. That's nearly 250,000 every day, nearly 90 million every year. And they need all the things that we take for granted: food, security, water, energy, all those basic requirements for a growing population. It's nearly 8 billion now. It will be 9 billion by the early 2030s, probably 10 billion by 2050. And combining that with sustainability, with ensuring that we don't destroy natural world. We don't cause global warming by burning too many hydrocarbons, that we keep ourselves safe from pandemics, which is the issue of the moment, is a real challenge. And I think that the thing that's really changed and should be evident to everybody in a group like this is that what used to be national problems, that things that were dealt with by a single government in a single geographic space, which is the whole history of the last 2,000 years, they're now global problems. And if we can't leap to global solutions, we're going to be in real trouble. And I think there are some signs of that. You talk about what Ukraine can do. I think of it as what any country, including Ukraine, can do as part of a world response to this very big set of challenges.
Yeah, we will come back to the Ukrainian realities. So what you are saying about is that the growing population is a challenge, and how we will deal with making sustainable life for all of the people that are going to live with this growing.
There are still more than 1 billion people who are living in absolute poverty, who have no access to commercial energy supplies or electricity or something like that. So we can't leave them behind. We've got to do something for them, but we've got to do it in a way that doesn't destroy the environment for everybody.
Yeah, because we have only one planet here.
Exactly.
Mr. Chow, do you agree with Mr. Butler, or you have some other challenges that are facing?
Well, no, I agree completely with Nick, but I would perhaps add to it that, and maybe this is because I'm a old guy, but it seems to me the pace of disruption have accelerated in the world over time, and whether the disruptions are caused by politics, economics, technology. We have a global pandemic right now that's spreading around the world, that there just seem to be more and more disruptions around the world, and they don't seem to be disappearing. They're just adding to the level of disruptions. But I would couple with that by saying that there's also, for a number of years now, around the world, a lack of trust on the part of the public on traditional institutions. So it's not clear that the institutions that we have built over the last 50, 60 years are up to the challenge of handling these disruptions. I mean, I look at my own country in the United States. There's definitely has been a change in attitude by the public on confidence in traditional institutions and their ability to handle the problems as they come up, whether they are the global recession that we had, the fragility of the recovery that we've seen just in the last few days, where are things heading, and the growing gap of in wealth within the population. It's not clear that both the national institutions as well as the international institutions we've built up over time, people don't have trust that they're up to the job. And we haven't yet found innovations that would help solve the problem. I mean, on the positive side, I know we're going to shift to energy at some point, but the American shale revolution was a disruption. It's a disruption to the way the industry have operated for the last 150 years. We don't completely understand what the consequences of that disruption is, but at least sitting in the United States, that was a technological disruption that gave my country benefits from it. So it's not completely pessimistic, but I think people are looking for new solutions to the problems that are piling up.
So basically, it's not only innovation technological, yes, because what we are currently facing is this innovation that is happening in the technological sphere, but we also need the innovation that is happening in government policies, trusting of people and political lives, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Nataliya, let me ask you from the Ukrainian side, yeah, what challenges globally do you see from our side here, like not from UK or US? They have we may seem completely different problems, but what would you say?
Oh, well, good evening for everyone. Sure, I agree with colleagues that climate change technology is a big challenge and opportunity at the same time, but we are in Ukraine. We feel acute feel of lack of security. And Ukraine and the world, not only we face the new challenges, new security challenges, as world is changing dramatically and very rapidly. So the type of war changed completely. So now we are not only facing a physical security threat as a country, and we are not alone in this in the world, but we also feel and face, for instance, cybersecurity threat, informational campaign change. So now we face with such a new issue as a deep fake manipulation, when some can, for instance, create panic just using social media spreading deep fake, and we experienced recently such thing in Ukraine, and it's not the only case in Ukraine. Biological threats. So it was not before, but now we're facing with first big example, and I don't think it's the last one. So the future will be like now. And cyber threats, as you said, economical as well. So, well, the type of war completely changing, and now we should be prepared for different type of threats. And Ukraine here, we are in the forefront of this innovation. Now I'm also taking part in National International Security course in Harvard University, and together with senior executive in national security, US national security, I can share a lot of experience being a member of parliament during the last 5 years when we face energy crisis. So energy can also be used as a weapon. And it's a very, very dangerous weapon because, for instance, energy is the base of economy, and you could destroy everything by destroying energy sources. So all these security threats together create a big issue, and we have a good experience. We have feel these threats by our own experience, and we should look for the solution with other countries because it's not local, it's a global issue.
Yeah, most probably it would be very difficult to solve the issues which are related to security, not only physical security, but also informational security, to deal with it by our own. Yes, we should involve more countries in order to make some collective ideas, collective innovation, how to deal with the issues that we have. Okay, so we add security here as well. Yulia, what would you say?
Of course, I will talk about the science because for me, everything I've heard is about that we have to produce new knowledge in order to create new instruments to solve global challenges, starting from clean water, and even the security challenges are about quantum computing today, quantum coding, and so on. So there are a lot of things that people should just imagine, just create, and it's about the science. From the other point about the trust, I can say that today we have globally the lack of trust to science in rational type of thinking, and as a result we have populism, we have a lack of rationality, and every part of our life, if we will try to analyze policies in every country or globally, we will see that nowadays governments are looking on the public, and the level of public is, I think, decreasing. They just to create some solutions which are not rational, which are not global in different senses, and which are not strategic. And as the result, we just go in on the trajectory which is far away from all these solutions. So for me, is the global challenge of to keep in line the more complicated challenges with our ability to solve them rationally. And this means the better education, better, more smart evidence-based policy making. It means, as a result, funding of science, because even in the United States, in Ukraine, for us, United States and Great Britain and other developed countries with their dedication to science, institutions which provide funding to science and so on, even we see for last 10 years the serious crisis of understanding why governments should give money for science. And for me, not only as for scientists, but also as for well-educated human, is the question if the challenges become more global, more complicated, and more dynamic even, we today say about this. Why today we have to make a war in order to make clear that it should be funded and developed better and faster in order we as a humanity are able even have a chance to win this game.
Yeah, I think it's somehow related to the informational security that Nataliya mentioned, yes, that the quality of information that we have during each day that we check the social media or traditional media, yeah? So the level of information and the evidence-based, yeah? So it's something somebody said, not scientifically proved, and this causes a lot of damage to the society.
It's about also critical thinking, because the amount of information is increasing. And we have to live in this world where every day you have the ability to get many bytes of information. But if you have the instruments in your brain, and we as the society are well equipped, so the average level of us is high enough, we are more resilient in the informational war, we are more resilient when we are speaking about the priorities and so on. But if we see the decreasing trend in all these things, we say that manipulation it will be the instrument of people who, so it will be easier to manipulate us as the world, not the personality which just looking something in social media. And it's a challenge, I think, that we today in Ukraine meet it these days, for example. It's very hard to see this situation.
Yeah, so raising the level of education on the broader level, yes, the whole society that we have in Ukraine, not only in Ukraine, in other cities as well. Pavlo, do you agree with the challenges that our guest today announced, and maybe you have something else to add?
Yes and yes. I agree with my colleagues, but let me drop one more, which was not mentioned. For me, maybe because my past occupation, the biggest challenge is refusal from the policy of a more open trade. It's a more and more acceptance of the policy and politics of protectionism. If you ask yourself what is the biggest threat at the moment, you probably have to ask yourself what is the biggest accomplishment in the last 30 years that happened to mankind. And I believe, and I'll be happy to discuss this, of course, I believe that the biggest accomplishment to the mankind is that hundreds of millions of people, mostly in Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Eastern Europe and Central Europe, were brought out of poverty into the middle class. Now, why did that happen? That happened because of free trade or freer trade. Because those countries, you take it from Japan to Czech Republic, were able to export, to produce the goods that are in demand for the whole world. to develop their own competitive trade advantage based on comparative advantage, which is economics 101. And all of that is currently under threat. And regarding Ukraine, it is basically suicidal. Why? Because our market is small, unlike the EU market or US market. And by the way, US has a new trade agreement with Mexico and Canada. We know this. EU remains a free trade area. There is a talk, of course, continuous talk of having a free trade agreement in Pacific Ocean area. Now, Ukraine as a country, as a market, is too small to survive on its own. So if the developed countries will refuse from the policy of free trade, this will be pretty bad for the countries like Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. So we are coming back to the issues that we cannot solve our problems only by ourselves. We should involve other countries and other people for that. So you are talking about this barrier, yes, about this opportunity for us to trade with all of the countries, with all of the rest of the world. My next question would be, what are the global barriers do you see for the development of countries? What we lack and what the world lacks in order to grow better, in order to live better? Please, Mr. Chow, if you may.
If I could just add on to what the minister just said, because I think I come from a country that once was the champion of free trade, at least in the post-World War II period, and had a lot to do with building the institutions to broadening trade among the nations, that we are also the ones in the last few years, particularly in the current administration, questioning the benefits of free trade, even though we were a beneficiary of free trade. And that has to do with something I mentioned earlier, which is the public distrust of what's really going on. That because middle-income people haven't seen their income grow in their minds to the same level the elite income has grown, maybe something that Ukraine can relate to, that the disparity of income says, yes, certain people benefited from free trade, but it wasn't spread equitably in the population. And this distrust of what was empirically something good that happened, expanding free trade, expanding economic growth around the world, means that populism finds a place of catering to people's worst fears about losing out and so on. So in many ways, the politics in America is broken because the center has hollowed out, so that more extreme voices, whether to the right or to the left, is resonating with the population because because of population not seeing the wealth that's been created being evenly shared, and that they are, at least on a relative basis, if not on an absolute basis, falling behind. And the inability of leaders to communicate to the public in a more constructive way that is convincing has been a problem, at least in my country.
Yeah, so the lack of good leadership, and we are coming back again to the question of trust to the government authorities that are dealing with the issues. This can be a barrier that will not help us to develop. Yes, Mr. Butler.
I agree with Ed, but I think what our real problem is a surfeit of pessimism. We seem to distrust because we believe things are going to get worse. All the history does not suggest that things get worse.
Actually, they are improving as far.
They are improving.
If you take into consideration the statistics here.
I was reading a history of the world, including of Ukraine 100 years ago, and the transformation of the country, and indeed of the UK, and of the Middle East, is absolutely remarkable, and an awful lot of it's down to science, which has transformed ordinary lives. I mean, it's hard to imagine what ordinary life must have been like here or in Turkey or in Africa 100 years ago, but it has been changed. People mostly have food. There are still people who don't have enough. We haven't solved everything. But I think if you look at the history on any dimension, things are better now than they were 50 years ago, better than 100 years ago, and extraordinarily better than they were 300 or 400 years ago. And I don't see why we couldn't do that again. I think in energy, you can see the pathways forward. It's not a scientific secret. They need research, which is why good companies are important, and government support is important, but they're there. And we have medicines. I mean, 50 or 100 years ago, indeed 100 years ago, there was an epidemic after the First World War which killed millions of people across the world. This epidemic will kill too many people, but not more than a few thousand, because we can control it, we know how to deal with it, there's international cooperation, and there'll be a vaccine, I think, by the end of the year. Now, that's not perfect, but we're a lot better off than we were. And if we sink into pessimism, we sink into looking for people to blame. We blame the other. We blame the black man, or we blame people from another country, or we blame women for wanting their proper role in the world and taking jobs from men. All these, they're all examples of applied pessimism, and they are unjustified.
Okay, so your advice would be not to be that pessimistic because, like, actually the things are pretty okay if to compare to the previous time. Yes, we have better medicine, we have better education, all of the things are improving. But maybe this is also the problem is that the media is very developed. The social media is developed. We find out about the bad news very quickly, and we think that everything is bad. Well, actually, it's not that bad. It's pretty good.
But on the other hand, positive things spread very quickly.
Yeah, but
The
people
internet
do not
and
react.
communications have spread remarkably quickly over the last 20 years.
Yeah. Okay. Nataliya, do you agree?
Well, I agree. The situation is improving, but at the same time, the condition has been changing. Mm-hmm. So we have different tools, but still different condition. And here is a very good example is climate change, for instance. So the world faced this challenge, and now it's inevitable that this is the biggest challenge now for our reality. And from the one side, yes, we should accept it. We should change the structure, and energy is 70% of CO2 pollution, and we should adapt to this new challenge. For the other side, we can take advantage, for instance, and be in trend, how world changing, how industry changing, and Ukraine as a country can also take this advantage. And to be as quick as possible to adapt to these challenges, changes, to create green jobs, to take new, alternative energy to the country, to attract technology of green finance. I suppose all these challenges can be the opportunity at the same time. The issue is how we will react, how we react facing these things. And here I put a lot of efforts, Ukraine to be in trend, not to oppose, not to stay aside, but to take all the trends around the world, technological, financial, to be in line with the whole world, with the whole progressive world.
Yeah, Yulia, do you find Ukrainian science able to react to the challenges that are happening?
When we speak about Ukrainian science, we have to understand that people who are in Ukrainian sciences, especially in fundamental sciences, are able to work on the world level, and many of us are working not in Ukraine, because here we have no conditions. Also in Ukraine, the percent of funding from private sector is very low. So we only can speak about the government funding. And government funding is something like 0.16% of GDP, which is lower the level of even reproduction of scientists. For, I think, 10 years, last 10 years, the number of scientists dropped at least 40%. So taking all this into account, we have now and for several years, we will have the human potential to do something on the world level, but I think if the global policy, I mean the Ukrainian policy will not change, and if we will be not able to create some partnership with business in some sciences, it will be, the answer will be no. Returning to the things we discussed, I'm sure that in order to make this in order to switch from the applied pessimism to informed optimism, we have to do a lot of in order to inform people of this, growth in everything. Because when you say in Ukraine about vaccination, about the medicine we have in order to win the fight with different things, you should understand that many people in 2020 say no. No to progress. So yes. Many people, we are talking about the pandemic of new challenges, but the challenges of 20th century is very important in Ukraine now. We have many challenges today with the diseases from the last century, and we have to say people, let us try and take from the progress which we have at the moment. Say right. People no. Right. Right. So, it's not about maybe pessimism, but a huge amount to work with in all the world, in Ukraine and in all the world, in order to help people build their trust in this progress. It's right. Nowadays we need from every particular human to know a lot in order to be sure that this progress is okay. It's not the threat, but the possibility to live better. But our ability to provide such a good education in all the world is limited. So we have to imagine some new way in order to make this trust in the progress of its from the 20th century. We have the other way that we think that progress is not okay, because atomic energy, because of a lot of challenges which science created, and right. People, so like a crisis of good progress, yeah, in people's perception. So in order to make this optimism based on people trust, we have to speak to them, and there is important the responsible leadership. So the leaders should make what you have said, that they should say, I'm doing like that. I'm personally, and everything we are doing like a team, for example, on national level, or businesses, I imagine, is in line with some big picture of what we think about world. And we are just doing these things every day in every our decision and in our personal lives. And I think that maybe these role models on the business level, on the national level, and then on the global level would change. The most important thing is behavior, yeah? Because many of us can say that we think something, it's okay, we think that global climate change is the threat, so a lot of things. But if we are acting like in line with these declarations, not. Right. And it's also a challenge. And talking about Ukraine and other nations and other countries, capability to meet these challenges, I think that it's very important on the national level to have the strategic thinking, vision, what we want to have as the result, because the problem of Ukraine is for sure no vision, what we're trying to build. Everyone, even the people who are trying to build some better Ukraine, some new life, they have different visions. And I think that is the situation when different good people and a lot of efforts as the sum of these forces give not zero, but rather strange dynamics. It's the first thing. Then this vision should be based on some understanding what we have in Ukraine. In different spheres of our life, we have no proper statistics, not proper data, and of course, no analysis what we really have. Because when you ask me about Ukrainian science, I can tell you with all my expertise that no one in this country have no full data on Ukrainian science in the moment. What is doing, who is doing, and so on, and how we can create some bigger picture without all this. So I think that it's very important to think very logically what we have, what we want, and what we should do in order to change something. When it's done on the local level, it is possible to do on the global level. I see no way.
You wanted to comment on?
No.
Yes, you touched a very important issue, very maybe applicable issue to Ukraine, is that if the government is not able to finance the modern science in Ukraine, maybe we should involve more corporate companies. And this is the question that I may ask Pavlo. What do you think about it? Should the corporate world be more involved in developing of the science in Ukraine, while the Ukrainian government is not still ready or does not have money for that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, who else would do it if the government has lack of funds? And that's exactly the case in Ukraine. By the way, those funds, the government funds, can be used much more effectively and efficiently than they are used at the moment, because instead of funding the patents and innovations and specific research projects, we are mostly funding the universities with its bureaucracy, or Academy of Science with its bureaucracy. But still, there is a lack of funds on that end, and the corporations, especially the big ones, because they have the resources, they need to pick up the bill, as we would say, not so much because of any kind of patriotic motive, but basically as a survival mode, because we actually know that big corporations are more vulnerable in the business sense than small companies, because actually they're so big. They are big and fragile. Small companies, they are limbler. They can quickly move from one industry to another, from one project to another. Big companies, do not have that luxury. But they do have resources. So obviously, their investment into research and development. Now, here's the government can play the role, and the government can stimulate it through tax incentives, for example. But yes, it's as all around the world, it's the corporations doing research and development with government support, not vice versa.
Okay, yes, this is something that, Yulia.
I agree with everything that was said, but I want to emphasize that we all have to understand that it's impossible to create innovations if you didn't made the fundament from the fundamental science, then applied science, and then innovations, if we are talking about science-based innovations. And it means that if you have a country like America, where for many years sustainably the government give money for fundamental science, applied science, then some Google and other corporations can make 0.5 funding for some projects and make innovations, because there are people, human resources, which are making PhD and then go into industry, because there is infrastructure, because there is a critical mass of people, infrastructure, and ideas, and so on. There is a culture of innovation as a result. If in Ukraine, for example, or other country where you have the lack of human potential because the people are just brain drain, if you have the lack of infrastructure, because everywhere the country funds the infrastructure and business funds the innovation, the people more. If you have the lack of infrastructure, and if you have the at least 100 years of war with people who are innovative, because every 10 years the people who were innovative, who were trying to do something, were just with some instruments were thrown from the population, you can't imagine the effective cycle of innovation creation. So today, yes, we can speak that the funding of science and all other budget sectors in Ukraine is not efficient, because the state is not efficient.
Yes.
Also because of that. And for 30 years to be inefficient, it means that, of course, in 2020 you can say that this sector, education, science, medicine, and so on, it doesn't work as it should work. And on the other hand, you can change things, but not saying we will just give money for innovation and everything which is funded from the fundamental science is bad and let us, cancel it. You should state the question globally. I mean, you, the population, the people, the society, the business. If we do not make the fundament in this, the base of this building, it's non-efficient for business to give money into innovation.
Yeah. So it's like you can invest in innovation that then they can make you profitable. This is one thing, but there are important things that are not profitable, but they still should be scientifically developed, and they may not be so interesting to the companies to invest in developing.
Even easier, people, the lack of people, I will end. Nowadays, the IT sector, which is the most developing in Ukraine, where they can take the new people for it. They go to the IT departments of universities, but for the data science, for more advanced things in IT, they go to theoretical physics, to applied math, and so on. But if we look for the dynamics of the people who enter the universities on applied math, theoretical physics, it's something like 4 times less than 10 years ago, every year. Mm-hmm. And I have a question for IT business. Where they will take people, these well-developed people with good math, several years later?
Yeah, that would be a problem facing next years for the industry that is very developing in Ukraine. It will be the human capital will be the main issue. We will move now to the second part about the challenges, opportunities, and how which place of Ukraine is in global society. And I would like to ask our international guests, yes, how do you see Ukraine? Because we live here, we see the country from the inside. It's our perception, yes, we think that everybody speak about us and talk about us and so on. But still, this is what we see in the news, mostly in the bad news, yes. But still, how do you see from there, yes, from US and from UK, how do you see Ukraine, and what maybe opportunities we have that we are not currently using, but we might?
Okay, let me start from what Yulia just said about innovation, because I think it is very interesting. As I read about it, I think what drives innovation is a sense of threat more than anything else. I think a lot of the advances in communications technology and materials technology came from the Cold War. They started in the military and they started in the US and in Russia. And a sense of threat focuses resources, focuses people, skills on responding to the threat. And I think now, and that's not always good. I mean, money can be wasted by that, but I think that's a key driver. Now, I think the threat now is climate change. That we're currently on a path to have global warming of more than 3 degrees by the end of the century and perhaps earlier, and a lot of extreme weather on the way. We don't understand the detail of the science well enough to make a proper prediction, but it's not positive. And I think that threat has really got through to people, to politicians, to governments, to business. You see all the energy companies moving now to do something about it. They're not all aligned, they're not all sure what to do. You see governments doing the same, and you see the European Union doing a lot with its new Green Deal. And that brings me to your question, which is what can Ukraine do? And I think Ukraine can do a lot more than just be passive and wait for things to happen. The European Green Deal will go ahead. I think it's as big a deal as the Common Agricultural Policy was 40 or 50 years ago. At the moment, it's quite insular. It's about the 27 member states. I hope it will be expanded to neighboring states. I think if it's not, places like this risk being cut out of European trade growth, and jobs will go unless Ukraine aligns with the changes that are taking place. And I think there's a great innovation opportunity. I think the next generation of renewables around hydrogen is the key thing, and I don't see why that couldn't be done here in Ukraine as well as anywhere else. And I think rather than just thinking great changes are going to be made somewhere else, it would be great to start some activity. It's partly government, it's partly commercial companies, it's partly universities and scientists, which gives Ukraine a chance to be one of the leaders in something rather than a follower. And I find there's a little too much following and not enough leading, and I think that that would be a great step forward for this country. There's a lot of emphasis on it in Europe, but nobody's actually doing it yet. And I hope somebody here, perhaps even in this academy, will start doing something about it, because it's much needed.
Yeah, so more active, more activities that are not that passive. Yes, maybe it's about, we have so many internal problems that we try not to deal with the global ones, but still we have to, because we live in the world that influences us as well, and we need to be more active in dealing with the global issues that we have.
And being more active will solve some of the problems you already have, you see.
Yeah. Mr. Chow, do you agree?
Well, you asked me how Ukraine is viewed, at least from the outside. It seems to me that Ukraine is a country with many advantages. It's got good natural resource endowment. It has talented, hardworking people who are capable, have proven capable of achieving things. Yes, maybe the investment in basic education have lagged, but up until recently, the quality of labor is very, very good. Some would think of your geography as a disadvantage, but it's also an advantage. You're next door to one of the biggest markets in the world, the European Union. And what has been lacking is this long transition from the Soviet command economy model. I've been coming to Ukraine on and off since 2001. I wasn't here at the beginning of independence, but I've been observing it for a very long time. And this inability to break from the past, and continue to suffer the legacy of the past, knowing all its previous failings, I think has really been a problem. So one of the things that causes me to be optimistic about Ukraine more recently is for the first time since independence, you have a post-Soviet leadership. You have leaders who didn't grow up in the Soviet Union. In my conversations in the last year, these are young folks that are easy to communicate with. They're still open to ideas. They enjoy having a dialogue. They're not prisoners of a old way of thinking about how society should be organized, how government should be organized, and so on. So this is a tremendous opportunity. Now, are they experienced enough? Did they have all the expertise? Did they have the capacity to execute policy? No, not yet. But as long as they are open to the world, the interest in integrating the world, there are lots of lessons to be learned about other transitional economies.
Absolutely.
Things that have worked, things that have not worked. Ukraine doesn't have to make everyone else's mistakes again.
I agree completely with that. I think it's worth looking at a role model. I know it's a very different country like Estonia.
Right.
Estonia was a Soviet state, as you were, and they ceased to be a Soviet state, but they didn't just say, there's nothing we can do because we haven't got great track record. They have become a leader across Europe in technology from their own efforts.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I think there are also models in East Asia.
Yes,
very different culture,
absolutely.
but they also went through a transition and tried a lot of different things. Look at a country like South Korea, for example,
Right.
or Taiwan, or Singapore. They won't all apply in Ukraine.
No.
But there are lessons to be drawn from them. And as long as Ukrainians are open to new ideas, talking to as many people as possible. I was watching a video at DTEK Academy of Jack Ma visiting Kyiv, for example. Being able to open your mind and not be bound by the past. I think this is very important. Nataliya talked about the threat the country is under, and which are real. I think the only solution to that is to make Ukraine stronger for everybody, and not just for a few people. And I think this is the contribution that certainly education, science, knowledge-based information sharing and so on can teach us. I am optimistic about Ukraine's future.
Yeah, this is very nice to hear.
You have to start the journey.
Yes, activities. Yeah. This leads to our third part of the discussion, which is about what Ukraine can potentially give to the world and what strategies we should take in order to be important in the world. Yes, and I may start with the Pavlo, if he is here. Still with us, with the question, there are two types of innovations. One type is evolutionary, very slow, step by step, you do the innovations and change the country. And another one is revolutionary, rapid changes happening very quickly in order to change the situation very quickly. What do you suggest would be a better way for Ukraine to apply?
I think it's a great question. Thank you very much. The only thing is that I rarely see this distinction between evolutionary and revolutionary. Maybe because revolutionary change is actually an evolutionary change which builds up into the revolutionary one. Basically, as we used to say, the quantity leads to quality at some point of time. Ukraine has, in a way, the history of innovation, believe it or not, at least the theory of innovation, because Joseph Schumpeter, who is believed to be the prophet of innovation as the theoretician of innovation, wrote his book, The Theory of Economic Development, 110 years ago, in the city which is now part of Ukraine. It's Chernivtsi, or at that time it was part of Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and the city was called Chernovitz. So, I only partially joke that the aura of innovation, at least the theory of innovation, should be here, should be around. Now, his most famous phrase was disruptive creation. So I agree with colleagues who were speaking, with Ed, for example, who also said that everybody in the world, Ukrainians too, need to be more open to new ideas, less protective of the old industries, fearing that they will die, because eventually they will die. But Schumpeter proved it 100 years ago theoretically, and we see it practically, that the new industries successfully replace the old ones and hire more people, not fewer people. So the distinction that I would use, you mentioned about Jack Ma in the Academy DTEK. There was another guru of innovation, Chan Kim, the co-author of Blue Ocean Strategy, who 2 months ago, he was preaching non-disruptive creation or non-destructive creation, arguing a little bit with Joseph Schumpeter that not every creation needs to be disruptive or destructive. And DTEK is actually showing that through renewables, through investment into DTEK Academy. Doing this, the company is not destroying the jobs, it's creating new industries and new jobs, and that's the way to proceed.
Yeah, Yulia, do you find the rapid change that may be in the science of Ukraine, or you still believe that in order to develop the science, you need to do it step by step, evolutionary in the right way? What would be the better way of changing science in Ukraine?
After Revolution of Dignity, I started to take an active participation in the reform of science in Ukraine, and at that moment I thought that it's possible to solve the problem of science in Ukraine, not waiting to the solution of all the Ukrainian problems. Now, several years later, I understand that if we are not capable to change our public policy creation and then making it reality, if we're not working with the people's mindset in order to be perceptive to the change, in order to rebuild the trust in change, because many people in many spheres that say that 30 years of Ukrainian independence is changes and reforms and changes, especially these years, and people burn out. They do not. So when you start to say about innovation, they say we are tired of it. Everything becoming worst. So it's about pessimism based on their life. They said, okay, it's the new reform, we will get less funding and so on. And I understand that it's a big story about, for me, now, I understand that if the science becomes the part of political agenda of Ukraine, then we will have the chance not only to reform the science, but to change the ambition of Ukraine. Ambition. So at the moment, I understand that this way is about to change the mindset of what we built all together, and then it will have not only some actions for my sphere, but also it will become some understanding why we do something in other spheres. Why for example, in energy, why we're not making something as in the old way, trying to protect our industry and so on. Why we are trying some new things? Why we are searching at the national level? Why we are trying to use something to create this innovation? Because we understand that we can. That we, like in Estonia, they have even only in Estonia, but for example, knowledge-based Estonia. They have the ambition to build such a country. In Germany, they have Germany, the land of ideas. And in Ukraine, we do not think in this way, so we can't expect some changes. About revolutionary and evolutionary, I think that the revolution of dignity, for example, shows that in principle these processes are evolve together, because some evolution is just you do not see it, but people are changing because so some younger people become stronger and have their voice in some politics and anywhere. Some people who are older, but they see the new possibilities and understand that there is some new ways to solve the problems. And we evolve as a society. But I'm sure that, so in principle, I can be optimistic and say, like you say, so now we have really the situation where we have some new type of politics and agendas and so on. So we can say that we have the good trend, but on the other hand, talking about the trends in education, in populistic things, I'm not sure that this trend, I'm sure that this positive trend is challenged by many things, and there are a lot of burst trajectories for Ukraine. So we have to make our ambitions greater in order to look higher, and then we have a choice of better trajectories, because when we are thinking only about our good trajectory, we are going to the worst ones.
Yeah. Natalia, do you agree that the people are already tired of these rapid changes and reforms, and every year we have some news, or we need some more calm time not to, have this all the time changing environment?
Well, when I came to Parliament in 2014, we faced really big challenges of energy security, so we didn't know whether we survive during the winter and whether it's possible really to supply energy to the population during this turbulent time. So we resolved this issue, we stayed and survived, went through these challenges, and now we are thinking about future of energy, for instance, and different times actually require different solutions. We face new opportunities, new challenges, and maybe need new approaches. But what I want to say is that actually all the innovation, they have to be market-driven, so there should be some demand for this innovation. For instance, companies now are looking for cheap types of energy because need of energy transition, because of this climate change issue. It would be tax. It's become absolutely unaffordable. For instance, coal generation. So big companies, they are looking for hydrogen, LNG, these cheaper sources of energy, and it's now the question how to take it to Ukraine. So we already introduced renewables. It's new type of energy. It's the biggest investment since 2014 in renewables in Ukraine, but it's still expensive. But technology is price going down, so maybe at some point we'll reach the point when it would be self-sufficient. So people are companies are looking for these things, so they actually trying to find the ways how to get it into Ukraine, because they have a real market need for such innovation and such challenges, to face such challenges. So I suppose we are quite progressive, and not only government, not only parliament, but also companies who are leaders in this sphere, they are institutions, they are looking for such solution. And one more point I want to say is that Ukraine is at forefront of a lot of challenges, and we are important part of European energy security puzzle about not only energy but also physical security. We are defending democratic values. So here it's a very good place to learn, to to have your realization if you are a scientist, if you are a politician, if you're like technology guy. So you have to you can realize your talent here because bigger challenge, big risk, but biggest reward at the same time. So you can invest more, but you can get more because of the opportunity. And for instance, when the country is stable, everything is okay, there is no such a big opportunity and a possibility to realize yourself. So just I support colleagues that we should keep optimist and keep going with our reforms and with our endeavors.
Yes, let's just end with the questions to our international experts. How do you see? Don't you think that we do not need so rapid reforms each year that we try to implement? You know, the tax reform. Every year we have a tax reform. We have another idea of other reforms and so on. Should we keep trying to develop like this, or we should think more strategically? You know, just like to take a decision and then to implement it, or not?
I think governments always go through this process of constantly changing things year by year. I think the key word I've heard all evening is ambition. And I think that if this country could find an ambition and articulate it, the ambition of your generation would be a tremendous force. I don't know quite where it would go. Different countries do it in different ways, as Ed says. There's no single model. But if you don't have ambition, you don't go anywhere. If you do have ambition, you'll go somewhere. And I think the freedom you have, you may not think it's freedom, but it's freedom compared to what it was 30 years ago. You should use the freedom.
Yeah, very nice words. Mr. Chow.
I think it's important to understand that reform is not a destination. The reform is a process. There are no perfect countries in the world. Every country needs to reform and improve itself and become better. So it's a process. I think the issue for Ukraine has been that process has been stop and go the last 30 years. It has not been sustained. So I'm more interested in seeing how the reform process in Ukraine under a new generation of leaders can be sustained over time rather than how rapid they can make a change and then get exhausted and stop or go sideways or go back. I think that, and here leadership matters, that explaining to people the strategy, not just the vision, but the strategy of how to get to the objectives and what are the material benefits that will come from it. It won't be overnight, but people need to understand where are you leading us to. And I think sustaining reform is much more important than saying, you know, we'll start reform and then we'll stop for a while or whatever. Understand that it's a process that has no end.
And it doesn't all come from government.
Right.
Yes,
I
also
mean,
the role of society pretty
Yes.
much.
Where are
is very
the two
important.
guys, two girls in a garage who are going to create the new Google?
Yeah.
That's what we
This is
want to
absolutely
encourage.
right. Yeah, so on this positive note, let's hope for the better for our country and for the world in general. Thank you very much for spending your time with us and discussing it. Hope to see you soon again in Ukraine. To our international guests, Yulia and Nataliya, thank you for joining. Pavlo, if he is still here, thank you as well for joining the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.